Hello and welcome to Death of a Thousand Cuts, making you an awesome writer one cut at a time. My name's Tim Clare and this is a show about writing for writers, for readers and for anyone with a morbid fascination with how the story sausage is made. On this show we have three central planks to our writing manifesto. Plank the first to help you write more, plank the second to help you write better, and plank the third to help you be a little bit happier as you do those things. To that end, I often get guests on the show, other authors and different writers and creators, and I talk to them about what it means to them to be a writer. I sometimes look at the first pages of listeners' work and give them feedback and suggest ways that they might make it even better. And I also talk about various issues to do with writing. As I record this, it's the first episode I've recorded since Death of a Thousand Cuts, my little podcast, broke the million listens mark, which I'm very well aware for many podcasters it is no big milestone. Many podcasts have millions and millions and millions of listeners, maybe even millions of listeners a month or week. But for me, that was pretty huge. And I'm not going to spend the episode talking about that because it's not intrinsically useful to reflect on the actual numbers. Except I just wanted to I felt it would be weird for me not to acknowledge it in some way, and also just be proud of it. You know, like I'm really happy and excited, and it is, you know, in some ways we're just a few thousand more than we were a week before. But it's kind of cool, and I just wanted to say thank you. And I think I made a promise to myself years ago, before I had my first book published, that I was never going to... this is to some extent pushing at an open door, but I made a promise to myself that I was never going to be... If I did writing, right, and I got to do my dream, which I do now. You know, this is what I always dreamed of, was being an author, being a professional author and writer, and being able to make stories and make books and help other people make stories and make books. It's funny now I say that, I realise it's true. What a lovely thing, you know, like I'm living my dream life. I have my wife and my daughter. I have a roof over my head. I have enough to eat. I'm healthy. I mean, it's a lot more than I ever dreamed. I'm not gloating. You're wrong. I'm sorry if things are going badly here at the moment. I wasn't meaning to rub it in. I'm just saying it's kind of amazing. And I made a promise to myself that I would never be too cool to allow myself to be wowed by that. And yeah, like I said, one never wants to come across as smug. That's note that is subtly distinct from one never wants to be smug. Perhaps I'm quite fine with being sort of privately smug on my own time, but I don't want to give the impression that I don't want to let on that I'm smug. But I just think if we're going to enjoy writing, if we're going to do this, it would be sad, wouldn't it, if we got to the place that we'd always dreamt of getting to, and then felt like we were too sophisticated to be like, oh, this is brilliant. Oh my gosh, what's going on? This is cool. Wow. Oh my goodness me. And I'm just happy to say I'm still just sort of amazed. And look, actually, to be fair, when I've heard other writers go, "Oh, it's so amazing, guys! I'm knocked off my feet. This is it's such a thrill for my book to be out." I'm doing a voice on that. Like, part of me rolls my eyes and go, "You're not that bothered. You want to sound. You're trying to make yourself sound modest and kind of like, oh, you love me. You really love me." But that's, you're being a bit precious and a bit over the top, and that's just my own sort of weird judgmental inner critic, in that inner voice, that we all have. Sometimes we're a bit judgmental of other people, and it's to do with our own vulnerabilities and weaknesses and secret fears, and I think that's true of me there. I judge other people doing stuff that, that I fear in or dislike in myself. And I wish I were better at that, at just going, maybe that person is just genuinely excited. And maybe, them talking about their success is bringing up feelings of like inadequacy and jealousy in me. Maybe I'm a little bit fearful, like, oh, am I not doing as well? Maybe that's why I doubt their sincerity, because it's a way of me sort of closing the perceived gap between our statuses, right? That I go, oh, well, they're not very, actually that person is morally reprehensible. Oh no, I feel a bit better about myself, But it's just cool. Like, I find writing, and by the way, I'm just going to talk this episode. I'm going to do this episode as a writing ramble. I've got a specific thing that I'm going to move on to, actually, so maybe it's not a writing ramble in the classic sense. But I just want to make this episode sort of accessible to new listeners. If you, joining the podcast, hi. I'll sort of talk about myself in a second. A little bit about writing. And I would actually like to talk this episode, just so so if you aren't interested in this subject, then you can switch off and do something more important with your day. I feel like that would be a sort of basic acknowledgement and respecting and honouring of your time. I'd like to talk a bit about writing non-fiction today, because it's been on my mind, because it's what I'm doing and it's what I did for my last book, and I feel like I've got a few suggestions to make. I feel, that writing non-fiction as an exercise is something that no matter what genre you're working in, whether you want to write stories, whether you want to write poetry, whether you want to write scripts, whatever you want to do, having non-fiction somewhere in your repertoire, having it as a place you can return to kind of work out as one of the machines in your creative writing gym. I think the personal essay and it is always going to be useful to you, or creative non-fiction in any capacity, because you'll always have your own life to work from, and I think it can be therapeutic. And I just think it so if you've never considered writing non-fiction, well, one, I'd say you might quite enjoy it, but secondarily, I think it's a great cross-training opportunity. I think it's a great place you can go to if you go, I'm actually ruling this out as something I'd ever want to do. That's fine. And actually, that can make it even better as an exercise in creative writing, because well, no one's ever going to see this, because I'm not doing this for publication, for a project. So then it just becomes its own little ring-fenced area of sort of personal nurturing growth and effort, and it becomes its own little hobby. And I hobby can be this terribly belittling word, but gosh, having a place, having your own garden and being able to work on it without thinking, is this going to be able to, will I be able to convince a series of people to convert this into food on my behalf? If I arrange a series of letters in a certain way, will other human beings, will the various economic systems we've set up convert that through various sort of like through the dark art of abstract economics? Will that eventually come back to me as food if I press this sequence of keys in such a way that these publicly available 26 letters and various grammatical marks, if I'm able to arrange those in a way that satisfies probably only like 6 judges in various professional capacities, most of which I will never see or even know their names, but if I can do that, then I'll be able to eat. Am I doing what? What an abstract evaluation process we're asked to go through when we're working as professional writers. Like, it's of little surprise that a lot of writers are somewhat well, I've stopped talking. As if you've listened to the show before, you'll know that I have various brushes with mental illness. I would say brushes with mental illness. I would say they're pretty big brush. It's certainly not a It's certainly not a moustache or beard brush. It's more like those massive roller brushes you get in a car wash that I've been pushed through naked by sort of a crowd with pitchforks while it's on its hot wax cycle. There's a nice little image for you there. To get back to what I was saying before, I just think I want to always embrace being excited about the good bits about writing and being amazed and recognizing that if the me in university or as a teenager could see where I am now. Yeah, I mean, sure, like, I did have moments of hubris where I imagined by 22 I'd be like a best-selling author and stuff like that. So maybe there would be a moment of, really? Oh, that's not quite what I envisaged. But for the most part, especially like the amount of time I suffered with like depression and feelings of real dejection and feelings that I was useless, to look at it and go, oh, hey, that's pretty good. And in fact, at the times where I just thought I was never going to be able to do anything, that I wouldn't be able to cope, that I wouldn't even survive this long, it's kind of a paradise. And I don't think your engagement with your writing has to meet the standard of, someone in a publishing house somewhere validating you by going, here's some money for it. Like, I think that's not a very healthy way to think about your self-worth. Regardless, even if they say yes, I still think it kind of, I don't want to use anything that sounds too kind of LA mum, but like, you are kind of handing over your power to someone else. And I think whenever you allow someone who isn't you to sort of be the final judge of your own self-worth, which, in my opinion, is sort of intrinsic and inalienable, and you are just worthwhile and inherently valuable and wonderful by virtue of being a human being and being alive and being, unique, a unique iteration of that. I don't think you can do anything that earns that. I think you just are worthwhile. But when you hand it over to someone else, even if they go, wow, you're wonderful, actually what you do is forge a bond of dependency upon that person and feelings of resentment, right? Like you start to feel a bit like, why am I having to like jump through all these hoops to try and make this person like me? And they probably don't see the relationship in that way, by the way. They're probably not feeling like, well, I'm going to decide whether this person lives or dies, whether this person is a complete waste of time or not. They don't see it like that, but I think we can all do this, with partners, with our children, with people we have professional relationships with friends, with the sort of unseen nominal social media crowd, or with readers or the public people in the publishing industry or whatever. There's this feeling of looking to people for ultimate validation, and even when you're given it. And I used to do like live performance a lot, like performance poetry, stand-up poetry, really, laughs and stuff. And you could have evenings where I ran the full gamut of responses from an audience, but you have evenings where you crush it. I think everyone who's performed for more than sort of 3 gigs has had shows that go very, very well, and you do have an immediate feeling of validation. It's also just like on a non-egotistical level, it is just nice to be in a room surrounded by happy people, and you brought some of that happiness to them. But like, I think there's a perfectly sort of non-malignant aspect to it, which is just like, I'm doing a job, I'm doing it well, that feels nice. I'm surrounded by some people, and they are happy, and that's nice to see that they're happy, and I contributed to their happiness. Well, that is nice, good, well done me. Like, all of that's completely fine and healthy, I think, and not terrible or wicked at all. And I think there's a sort of egotism in talking about egotism sometimes with people in the creative arts and the performing arts, where we talk about it's all about ego and stuff like that. But no, I think you can have pride in just come on. You don't need to self-mythologize it and start. But you can also feel a little bit like when you get that validation, like, oh fuck, like that's where I go to get my good feeling now. What if next time they don't like me? And you can just start leaning on that, and you become dependent on it. And I'm sort of dancing around the language of addiction, and I think that maybe that's a step too far. But you get the idea, and I think that can happen with any pursuit that we do or do well or do for pleasure or anything like that that we have to sort of manage how much of us. Well, it sounds like I'm being mealy-mouthed when I say, you have to manage how much of yourself you give to your writing. I don't mean that at all. I think you can give your heart and soul to trying to do a book well. You can make yourself vulnerable. You can put a lot of effort in. I think you can do all of that without going, and if a rando doesn't like the result, I'm bad. Or contrariwise, if a panel of 3 judges on a book prize say that this is good, I am good. Like, no, that's not true at all. People who, you probably don't like or approve of their ethics or the way they've lived their life have sold millions of books in the past, and people who've worked very, very hard have, had their work sort of, well, you wouldn't know because it's, because of survivorship bias, right? You don't have access to all the people whose work is objectively brilliant, who you haven't. I'm not talking about myself. Sorry, I realised the way I started anonymising it. You don't know about the people labouring in the shadows who have written probably the best novel stroke thing of the 21st century. And it's just too early. And maybe it'll be dug up in the 23rd century and they'll realise, but it'll be too late. And he'll be the most popular hypothetical dinner party guest, dead or alive. Will be Tim Clare. But all you'll have is this audio record of his terrifyingly yet charmingly vulnerable, terrifyingly prescient prediction that's what would happen. No, but anyway, my point is I'm excited and happy. I'm working on this new non-fiction book. My daughter's just started school, and so I've been a little bit sort of distracted from writing because of that, and as a result I didn't make very good notes. And I'm looking back at my work and going, I can't remember what I was doing. So I've got a little bit of a hill to climb. And I must admit, I opened the files today to look at my notes and realised I'd hardly made any notes. And I'm not great at this. But I thought I just want to jump into a little bit of a talk about writing non-fiction. Maybe particularly, not necessarily particularly non-fiction about yourself, but I just wanted to talk a little bit because I've already got one book out that you may have heard of called We Can't All Be Astronauts that came out in 2009, I want to say. I think it was 2009. And that was a sort of memoir about writing, but also about me having depression. I think I don't... Do I? Yeah, I think I do use the word depression in there, but I think I talked about, I think I wrote the book as if like it was all about me not becoming a writer, and I think there's more to it than that looking back. But anyway, I've got a new book coming out next year called Coward, which is all about anxiety, which is now finally we've been able to announce it, and there's proofs going out to various people, and that's all quite exciting. But I must admit, you just try and get on with the next thing because it's exciting, but you've got no control over it. And and actually, not to immediately contradict what I said about not being, I want to always be excited about stuff. I'm excited that I get to do this. I'm excited about the writing, but I'm not always actually that excited by stuff being out there. Like, that's not the bit of it that I feel excited or pumped by. I enjoy the writing of it and the discovery and the process. And kind of once it's out there and it's written, the game's over. My role in it is over. I mean, it's always great, if someone enjoys it, if someone gets something out of it, that's terrific. Of course it's terrific. But I don't. But that's kind of ancillary to the great part of it, which is, I'm working on a book now, and I don't know what it's going to be about. Ultimately, obviously I've got my theme and I know roughly what I'm writing about. I'm, working on something about games, tabletop games, and the people who play them and the communities around them, and why I'm interested in them, why I at 40 care so much about them, sometimes to the point of obsession. And this is something that interests me, and I want to write about it. But I'm interested because I'm getting to speak to people, and it's a bit sometimes writing a non-fiction book. And so I guess what I'm going to do for you over the next few minutes or however long is just try and make a pitch of, like, if you've never considered writing non-fiction, why I think it's worth considering. I think a lot of us have got a model for writing a novel, right? That you get an idea for a story and you start writing. I think less of us have got an idea or really know that we have permission to sit down and write some non-fiction. Sit down and write a book that is about something real, that isn't some sort of like incredibly complicated, biography. Although, we had Kieran Pym on a few episodes ago to talk about a biography that he wrote. And he sort of talked a little bit about that process. So of course you can do that as well. And I'll go into this in a sec. But I think few people have a sense of permission of being able to write non-fiction, or they think, well, why would I want to write? No one wants to read about me. And I just think it can be one of the most exciting, enriching things to find a story that you want to write about, or something in the real world, and then research it. It's like being a detective. I've never been a detective. I'm using a kind of simile that nods towards cultural stereotypes, but it's just like going on a treasure hunt. And every non-fiction book that I've sat down to write, genuinely the writing of it has genuinely, without exaggeration, changed my life. I can't put it in any stronger terms, and that's honest. And that's not a reflection of the quality of the books at all. I'm not making any kind of claim about whether you would enjoy the books or whether it's kind of, again, that's kind of like outside. It's kind of irrelevant to whether the books are any good. I'm just saying the process of writing a non-fiction book. This is my first argument for why you should consider it. The process of writing a non-fiction book about a subject you really, really, really care about. Almost one, I'm going to use the phrase, that you have to write about. You don't, obviously. It's always voluntary, but a slightly bizarre set of circumstances which you would be incapable of not choosing whether to write the non-fiction book. But writing a non-fiction book on a subject that you have to write about, I think can't not change your life. That is inelegantly phrased. Can't not. If you write about something that you care about deeply, it will change your life, guaranteed. I think that's probably the best summation. And how has that happened for me? Well, it's my first book, We Can't All Be Astronauts. writing about wanting to become a writer and having failed, and writing about depression and my relationship with my dad, and meeting other writers who had not got where they'd wanted to be. One aspect of it was I sold the book just before my grandfather died, and he'd wanted to be a writer all his life and had never been successful in getting anything published. And I got to tell him that I was going to be a published author on his what turned out to be on his deathbed, in hospital, and he was just over the moon. It felt meaningful and good and almost miraculous to him, and then he came back to life. No, that's sorry. No, he didn't. It didn't. Sadly, it was not sufficient to prevent his death. That would have been. I would have probably spun that out into a sequel if that had happened. But it brought some things to a head. And the writing of the book, and then the selling of the book, and then the people I met there, it allowed me to talk to some people in my life about dreams that they'd had. And, not just my grandfather, but my mum's mum on the other side of my family who'd wanted to write and then had given that up. And how I might be how I might have absorbed some of their dreams, without realising, and I was taking those on, And then one of the people who read the book when it came out, one of the few people who read the book, because it didn't do very well, it wasn't seen by many people, the sales of it were not great, but one person who read it ended up being the person who became my wife. I think I've mentioned that on the podcast before, but she read it and something in it resonated, from her own experiences making music. And I don't think that would have happened if I hadn't been honest in it, if I hadn't written about something that I was really felt like an important part of my life. I don't think there would be anything to resonate there, like I didn't lie. I made myself vulnerable. And that, if you do that, then there's something authentic there that might connect with other people who feel the same way. And so in a very real way, if I hadn't sat down and tried to write that book, I wouldn't be sitting here now. I wouldn't have this house. I wouldn't be married to my wife. I wouldn't have my daughter. That's like that. That's incalculably huge, right? The impact of my writing that book. It's like it's just massive. I mean, you may be sick nothing, or Tim, you might have been, you might have had a much better. There may have been other options, but I really, not better options certainly. I'm joking. Like I think it's it's just I know you can't. I'm not saying if you write a non-fiction book, you will meet the partner of your dreams. Maybe an alarming prospect to you if you're already happily in a relationship. But I'm saying that these things can connect you with people or move parts of your life forward in ways that you might not be expecting. I think it gives you an excuse to pursue. Secondly, if you're writing about something on a subject that you really care about and that really matters to you, and I don't want to sort of circumscribe that in any way that means it's got to be about some sort of burning social issue, although it can be, right? Like if that's genuinely what matters to you personally, that's the thing you in your heart you feel like you have to write about, of course. But I think the key thing is it just has to matter to you. And like for example, I've had Helen MacDonald on the show, who wrote H is for Hawk and wrote a book It's got lots of themes, but it's it as well as nature and history and things like that. And she also talks about a fantasy novelist and birds, right? Like, but at the heart of the book, it's a story about death and grief. And I think it's also a book that maybe before it existed, few people would have seen it as a viable subject matter. Certainly not to sell in the numbers it did. And I think it just goes to show that if something is written about with enough care, and if it really, really matters, and it's the book you had to write, then I think that, and it's good. And it probably that it has a little bit of a fair wind behind it and a bit of luck, but I don't think people would have been, I'm sure people wouldn't have been recommending it to each other if they didn't read it and feel profoundly moved and captivated and engaged by the experience. And so I think, and you can't carry yourself through the effort that is necessary to write a non-fiction book if it isn't the book that you have to write, And I mean, so maybe that's not helpful in a way, because saying it's the book you have to write can make the bar seem impossibly high. You think, well, I'm not writing it now, so it can't be the book I have to write. Yeah, because I'm not writing it now, and the idea of it sounds like a bit of a ball ache. I'm not feverishly researching it online at 2 a.m. In many ways, I don't feel like writing it. So is it the story I have to write? So, and maybe in a sense you don't quite know what you want to write about until you start. So I just think it's got to really matter to you, the subject. Even if you feel like, I couldn't write that, I don't think I'd be good enough, I don't think I'm smart enough. But do I care about it? Yeah. I feel like, with this new one I'm writing about on games, do I want to write it? Well, not all the time. Sometimes it feels a bit scary. I feel that I find it hard to sort of put words together in some kind of coherent way. I find it hard to decide what other people care about. I think, does anyone going to give a shit about this? Sometimes you research a thing and it's profoundly boring. You look into the history of something and you go, that's shite. That's who gives a shit. I don't care. I love games, and I do not give a monkey's bumhole. I do not give a monkey's ain about that. That's just a series of dates. Nothing interesting or profound. So you're saying that decks of cards, their appearance changed as print technology got more sophisticated. Well, fucking hell. Who gives a shit? Nobody gives a shit. Do you know what I mean? You can do research and just go, I don't care about this aspect of it. But so I don't want to write it all the time. But does it matter to me? Yes. I can answer that immediately. Does it matter to me? Yes. Of course, yeah. And sometimes I come away from the conversations I'm having with people around the book or for the book, and I'm just jazzed. I'm so excited because it matters to me. And at some fundamental level, I don't give a shit if anyone else cares about it. I'm going to try and write a book that does that, but this will have all still been valuable to me. I mean, I will be in deep shit financially if no one's interested in it, but I'm living my best life speaking to people about stuff that I care about. And I think that's the moment. And when I've spoken to other people who've written non-fiction that they've really enjoyed writing, that's involved like research, that's involved approaching other people, that's the bit that you're just like, this is neat. This is kind of cool, because you get to just go on a little treasure hunt, a little detective. You get to start writing to people. I hate that in terms of, I feel anxious. I feel like I'm going to bother them. I feel like they're going to tell me to fuck off. But I'm approaching people and finding someone who is an academic who researches X, Y, or Z. I'm finding someone who's famous in this area, and I drop them a little line or try and find some way of approaching them and going, will you speak to me for this thing? And every single one is just like, it's an exciting little something that you're advancing. It's an excite, and sometimes you have those conversations and they say stuff that's so interesting, and you get a nice little quote that you're like, oh, that's just summed up something that I was thinking about so well. And sometimes you'll speak to someone and they'll say, hey, have you spoken to such and such? If you want to find out about this, you need to speak to X. And you go, oh, and they go, I can put you in touch with them if you like. And you go, oh, fucking hell. And you're like, you feel like you're cracking the case. It's cool and it's exciting. And if you care about the subject, right, they're going to be telling you stuff that's like revelatory in a field, in an area that you really care about. Like when I wrote my book about anxiety, I was writing it from a perspective of someone who anxiety circumscribed like every day of my life, who was having like panic attacks weekly and often daily and often multiple times daily. So when I was asking, a neuroscientist, a psychiatrist, a immunobiologist, a sports scientist, about the state of play in sort of anxiety, how it works, what our latest technology is, the latest science, what the latest research is telling us about how to deal with it. I cared about their answers. This was like deeply, deeply interesting to me, and it had real world consequences. And I kind of got an audience with all these people that I normally wouldn't have access to. I can't afford, to, like, I think, like, and I got quoted for a 90-minute session with a private psychiatrist was like 390 quid. Which is just absolutely fucking ridiculous, right? For an evaluation session, absolutely dreadful amount of money that someone's expected to pay to get a formal diagnosis, and that is like fairly low compared to what someone might be expected to pay privately to say get a private diagnosis, assessment and diagnosis, say ADHD or autism, which is like a 2-day assessment process typically, right? But sorry, my point being that in writing the book, I got to chat with Dr. Adrian James, who is the president of the Royal Society of Psychiatrists, because I'm doing a book. And they don't ever go, you know what is interesting, in case you're going, well, you're the great Tim Clare. Of course, doors open for you wherever you approach someone. But no, like, nobody knows who the fuck I am. Nobody even went, have you sold the book yet? Because when I was speaking to most people, I hadn't. Who's going to be publishing this? No one said, what have you published before? They just went, yeah, right. I just said, I'm writing a book. Then they went, yeah, all right. And at some point you have to be, one of those people is going to be the first person you've spoken to for the book. And I'm writing a book. Who have you spoken to? No one. Doesn't matter. Like, I think people are sort of surprisingly, or at least, and I doubt that I have some devastating charisma that opens doors for me. I don't think that's true at all. I think, if anything, I come across a little bit highly strung and needy in my emails with people. But, in some people will speak to you. And then you're chatting to them. And through a process of speaking to people, then you start to feel a sense of legitimacy slowly. Of course, you feel element of imposter syndrome, but then I always like to think of that more as mischief, right? I'm just like, oh, I'm getting away with it, free ride. And then after a while, you sort of build these things up, and then you do know a little bit about the things. So you're getting access to people. Then you go. So think about like subjects you really care about. I don't know what it is. Maybe something in your family history you always wondered about. You want to go digging back into something that affects you in your daily life, some big question that you've got. And then you can kind of go digging into that, and you go, who would I want to speak to? Who would I want to hunt down and get access to? Or they'd be difficult. So who's adjacent to them who I might be able to speak to? Do you know what I mean? Like all of these things, it's quite exciting. And you get to do that. And it's legitimized through the process of writing a book. And then maybe at the end you get paid for it. Like, how exciting is that? And you get this process of discovery, and then you get to go to the library. And I realise I'm getting excited about going to the library, but libraries are cool. Fuck you. But you get to go to the library, and you go and you're like looking up a particular subject, and you find an old book on it, and you're looking through it, and you find, I've been speaking to someone from the British Museum, and then contrasting like what he's told me with like old like photocopy, well, I guess like scans of typewritten letters from the 1920s, and then those, cross-referencing those with like a history book that I've found that I got a second-hand history book off Abe Books that's out of print now, but I wanted to get hold of it because I knew it would have an account of this archaeological dig that I wanted to know about, and that kind of stuff, and putting stuff together, and then finding a news article and realising on a subject that you're interested in and going, oh, it's got the name of the journalist who wrote this article. What if I drop them an email and say, I know this is going to sound cheeky, but I loved your article and I'm really interested in it. Can I speak to you about it? And they say yes. And then you're speaking to them. And then you're speaking to someone on the opposite side of the world about X, Y, and Z. And it's so exciting to me. It's so exciting to me doing non-fiction. Because you can affect the world in real time. You can make connections. You can figure something out for yourself. I mean, writing the book, writing Coward, it's been nearly 2 years. Come November, it will have been 2 years since my last panic attack. And I've been having them for over 10 years, as I say, weekly and sometimes daily. And if you've ever had a panic attack, you know how intense that is and how bad I had it. How utterly bad. And I did some stuff and explored some stuff in the writing of the book, and they've gone. And I've never had one since. And that is unreal. Like that is life. You can see why I'm calling it life-changing. It's not an exaggeration. It's not a joke. So in a sense, whether the book does well or if no one buys it, I don't give a flying fuck, because it was worth it for doing that. Like, that has changed my life. And it's something I had to write about. And writing this book about games, it's going to sound weird. And I'm not really ready to say why yet, but the writing about games has led to some sort of profound moments of self-discovery. And also I've been talking to some great people, and I'm dead excited. And it's something I care about. Why do we play? Why do I play? What's it meant to me? I think about sitting around the table with my dad and playing card games, and how that is such a happy and peaceful place in my mind for me, is sitting down with my dad to play a game. It's such a safe zone for me, and returning to a table and to playing a game on a table where there's cards, or getting the board out and rolling dice. It's such a it's so associated with safety and stability and things being okay in the world. And I'm sure you've got similar associations in your life, whether it's, cooking. Maybe you cooked with your mum or your dad or your uncle or your granddad, and there's certain smells, maybe certain spices, or a certain cake you used to make together, or something you used to listen together on the radio, or what the TV program you watched together, or a place you used to visit, a summer holiday destination, or a park, or... We've all got these profound sensory associations that at some level inform fundamental beliefs about the world, whether the world is a good or bad place, and they inform decisions we make in our lives. They inform how we try to love our children. They steer our behaviours when we're looking for comfort or safety, or there might be other decisions that have negative associations where we don't feel we can do something because of this space that we can't talk to, we can't talk around. And that's the other thing I want to say about writing non-fiction. Is like fundamentally, right at the heart of it, I think with any difficult thing we've been through, or even if it's not traumatic, just something complex and nuanced and knotty, and it feels like we can't resolve it in our head, I think, fundamentally as humans, we want to be heard. We want to speak to one another. And, we're a social species. I think that's a very, very uncontroversial statement, that we're gregarious and we want connection, and we want real connection, which is so... It's a trite thing to say, but it's so hard these days. It's so difficult for us to make space for each other, for someone to be not okay in our presence, for a friend to be like bawling and like fucked up and, want our time for 3 hours or, to be miserable, or to be shitty or down or blue. It's so hard for us to make space for people to not be just like, to be... We're okay with people being sort of like not a little bit not okay or whatever, or having some doubts, but it's hard to make space for people to be like really... It's hard to make space for a friend. You don't meet up for a coffee and someone's like going, I just keep thinking about death. Like, it's hard. That's not socially... We've got a whole suite of behaviours that are socially acceptable, and a whole little roster of, I guess, exchanges that are seen as being sort of within the normal currency of talking. And, you'll have various acquaintances, not quite friends, who you have social interactions with and you can share jokes with and stuff, but really you can't really talk about stuff, you just go through a series of social performances. And I don't mean to diminish those lovely little, the person you wave at, the name of the person in the shop, whatever. I don't mean to be scathing. I'm not saying we should be able to you should be going into the shop and having like dark existentialist debates with them all the time. But it is rare to be able to speak your heart, speak your doubts, speak your joys as well. Your secret yearnings. God, how many times have you, had a secret crush or something, that you can't talk about, or a secret fantasy? I don't mean a sexual fantasy. I just mean, it's even something as silly as like a country you just long to go to and you don't want to talk about it because it sounds silly. Maybe a career that you'd like to do that you're not doing now, but it doesn't seem very responsible. And it's not necessarily that you want anything to change, but how many of those things just remain utterly in our own heads, or just fears or worries or someone you miss, or memories that maybe you're not even consciously aware of, but like if you got to talk about something and someone asks you and genuinely interested in you, tell me about this time, and you start pulling it out and teasing it out, and suddenly you're remembering this amazing holiday you had when you were 12, and the sandy beach and rock climbing and that lovely, safe, cozy feeling of climbing up into a sand dune and going through that coarse grass and finding a hollow at the top of the sand dune where the wind just cuts off and you lie down and everything suddenly goes still and quiet. Just more than anything else, I think writing non-fiction, writing about your life, revisiting in all five senses your memories and telling the story of them and talking about how you felt then and how you feel about it looking back. So many of our unresolved emotions are just they are just like messages that want to be delivered. They want to know, they want to hand that letter over and for someone to say, message received. I hear you. God, that sounds amazing. What a beautiful time you had. Or I just want to say, like, I'm sorry you went through that. You know, you're a wonderful person. You're beautiful and you don't have to change. You're great just as you are. Just so many of our feelings, I feel, are just like messengers who just are so tired and they want to hand the message over, the letter over, and then they can have a biscuit and go to bed, you know? That's all they're looking for. And fundamentally, writing non-fiction lets our stories be heard. The page listens to us in a way that no one else would. And we can figure out what we mean. And sometimes, you write down one thing and then later on you come back to it and you go, you know what, that's not the whole story. And that's not quite what I meant. And you can refine it, There's not just one thing. It's not always just about venting, Maybe you come to the same thing a few different ways, and as your feelings are heard, as your story is heard, your feelings about it change. The message is delivered, and I think can be the most profound experience of all. Is writing your story and listening to the stories of others and having those stories be heard. Because we are a social species, and so much of the vocalizations of stories in our head, and really what is the purpose of a story if not to be heard? What is a story if it's not heard? I don't know. We're such these narrative generating machines, and we want to be able to pass these things on. It's part of, what drives us is to tell and hear and be heard. These stories. I really think, you could stand to, it's not even a writing exercise, just something that you could think about. And I think it's great to then go and read some people, go to the non-fiction section in your local bookshop and find a couple of books that on a subject that just interest you and read how other people have approached this, right? But have a think about what do you care about, and what, if you were given the chance, would you write about? And I know there's some things that, I suppose when we're getting published, then sometimes the question is like, why you? Why are you the right person to write this? And so sometimes we have to work out how we ground it in the personal. But also, sometimes with a biography, and they say, why you? And the reply has to be, why not me? And sometimes you can make the case for yourself by doing the work, right? Go, why me? Well, because I'm the only person who cares, because I care about it enough. Because I'm going to go out and I'm going to find out about this person, this obscure person that no one else cares about. And I'm going to start doing the work. And I'm going to find how I get access to the archive with this person's letters in. I'm going to approach their widow, not in a threatening way, just a nice letter saying, I'd really like to write a book. I'm interested in writing about this person. Would you be willing to speak to me? And you start the ball rolling, and you say, well, guess what, universe? I don't think the universe is sentient, but I think it can be fun and useful to pretend as if it is. I tell you what, universe, rather than me assuming that I'm not allowed to do this and acting as if that's true, I'm going to assume I am allowed to do this, and you can do the work of trying to throw up barriers to prevent me. And if you can't stop me, then we'll just then I win the right to write it. Let's see what happens. And actually, you can fold the barriers into the narrative. You can make the story. All my books that I write have me. I exist as a character within them. As the person writing it. I talk about my reasons for wanting to write it, and I include the reader in the process of having written it. I don't pretend that I'm objective. I'm a subjective person who cares about the subject. And I think, the whole process of being sort of not qualified to write it, or not sure who to go to, or tracking stuff down, can be part of the thrill for the reader. I think that we can get behind you. Why do you want to write this? Well, I just care about it. I just care about this band because when I was growing up, I was a really lonely teenager, and they got me through that period. I listened to them all the time. I listened to them through my parents' divorce, and I connected with those lyrics in such a profound way, and I just have to know what it was like from the other side of the speaker. I'm going to do a good job of this because I care. That's an exciting. You don't have to be like a famous music journalist who, frankly, probably is going to do a sort of more distanced, perfunctory job on it. Because I care, because I have to. Because I have to is such a good reason. Why are you the right person to write this book? Because I have to write it. Sign me the fuck up. Right. I'm going to leave you there. Thank you for helping Death of a Thousand Cuts reach 1 million listens. You're wonderful. If you enjoyed the show and you'd like to support it and allow me to continue doing it, you can drop me a few beans via the my coffee page. That's www. You don't need that bit, do you? ko-fi.com/Tim Clare. Put a link in the show notes. I'm just going to, make a general appeal. If you like the show and you want to drop me like £3, if like a third of people listening now go and click the link, my coffee page, and drop me £3, I'll be pretty much set for the year. So, yeah. If you like the show and you like me putting out weekly content and you want to support it, you don't get anything except for my gratitude and, the sort of raised likelihood of me continuing doing this show for writers and for anyone who cares about books. But generally, I would want to say thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing it with other people. Thank you for writing to me. There'll be a link to my website in the show notes as well. That's timcloudpoet.co.uk. If you click on the contact me link, you can just drop me a line. Tell me what you enjoy about the show, what you'd like to hear me talk about in the future. Send me your first page if you want me to do, a critique of it. That's it. Thank you. And thank you for listening to me this far. That's really generous of you. I hope you're having a great life, and I wish you a wonderful week of writing.